The girl with the threadbare dress stood in the general store doorway, like she was afraid to breathe too hard, as if the very act might cause the fabric to disintegrate around her thin frame. And Nathan Xerxes noticed her immediately because no one in Bannack, Montana looked quite that desperate in the spring of 1875. He had come into town with the rest of the crew after 3 months on the trail, driving cattle north from Texas, through conditions that would have broken lesser men. His boots were caked with mud and dust, his leather chaps worn smooth in places from countless hours in the saddle, and his pockets heavy with wages he had earned through backbreaking labor under the relentless sun. The other cowboys had headed straight for the saloon, whooping and hollering about whiskey and card games, but Nathan had always been different. He wanted supplies first, pleasure later, if at all. He had learned young that a man who took care of necessities before indulgences was a man who survived. The girl could not have been more than 19 or 20, with auburn hair pulled back in a braid that had seen better days and eyes the color of creek water in summer. But it was her dress that arrested his attention completely. The garment had once been blue, he thought, though it was hard to tell beneath all the patches. Squares of brown fabric, pieces of gray cotton, strips of what looked like old flour sacks, all stitched together in a desperate attempt to keep the dress wearable. He counted at least 30 patches just on the parts he could see, and suspected there were many more hidden beneath her thin shawl. She was looking at the bolts of fabric on the far wall with an expression that made Nathan's chest tighten. It was not simple longing. It was the look of someone who had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. "Can I help you, miss?" The storekeeper's voice was not unkind, but it carried an edge of impatience. This was a man who had seen too many people look at goods they could not afford. "I was just looking," she said quietly, and even her voice sounded worn thin. "I will be going now." Nathan watched her turn toward the door, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. Something in him shifted, the way the earth shifted before a storm. He had been raised by a mother who worked her fingers raw to keep her children fed after his father died in a mining accident. He knew what it meant to patch and repatch until there was more patch than original garment. He knew what it meant to stand in a store and pretend you were just looking when your heart was breaking over something as simple as a length of new fabric. "Wait," he heard himself say, and the girl stopped, turning back with startled eyes. "I'm sorry to bother you, miss, but I was wondering if you might help me with something." She looked confused, glancing around as if he might be talking to someone else. "Me?" "Yes, madam." Nathan stepped forward, removing his hat in the way his mother had taught him was proper when addressing a lady. His dark hair was pressed flat from the hat, and he ran a hand through it self-consciously. "You see, I have a sister back in Texas, and her birthday is coming up. I wanted to send her some fabric for a new dress, but I do not know the first thing about what a woman would want. I was hoping you might give me your opinion on which would be best." It was a lie, smooth as river stones and just as carefully placed. He had 2 brothers, no sisters. But he could see the girl's face change, suspicion warring with something that might have been hope. "I am not sure I would be much help," she said slowly. "I would be mighty grateful," Nathan replied, and he meant that part. "My sister Rose is about your age and height. Maybe you could pick out something you think she would like." The girl's fingers twisted together in front of her patched skirt. "I suppose I could try." They walked to the fabric section together, and Nathan was intensely aware of how thin she was, how carefully she moved as if conserving energy. The storekeeper watched them with interest, and Nathan gave him a nod that said he was a paying customer and to keep his observations to himself. "What colors does your sister favor?" the girl asked, reaching out to touch a bolt of green cotton with a reverence that made Nathan's throat tight. "Why don't you pick out what you think is prettiest?" he suggested. "What would you choose?" She bit her lip, and he saw that she had a small scar at the corner of her mouth, probably from some childhood accident. "The blue is lovely," she said finally, gesturing to a bolt of fabric the color of a Montana sky in summer. "It is practical and would wear well. And this cream muslin would make a good everyday dress. It takes dye well too if she wanted to change the color later." Nathan nodded, making a show of examining the fabrics she indicated. "Those sound perfect. How much fabric would she need for 2 dresses?" "2?" The girl looked alarmed. "That is very generous." "She is a good sister," Nathan said simply. "How much?" 8 yards of each should be plenty, with enough left over for repairs later." Nathan turned to the storekeeper. 8 yards of the blue and 8 yards of the cream muslin." While the storekeeper measured and cut, Nathan kept up his pretense, asking the girl questions about buttons and thread. She answered with growing confidence, and he learned that she knew quite a lot about sewing. Her name was Rose Blackwood, which made his fictional sister's story somewhat amusing, though he did not point that out. She lived on a small homestead about 5 miles outside of town with her father, who had been injured in a logging accident 2 years ago and could no longer work. "We get by," she said, and Nathan heard volumes in those 3 words. They did not get by. They scraped and struggled and went without. When the storekeeper wrapped the fabric in brown paper and twine, Nathan paid without flinching at the price. He earned his money and he would spend it how he liked. Then, as if the thought had just occurred to him, he turned to Rose. "Miss Blackwood, I am going to be in town for a few weeks while my trail boss sorts out some business. Would you mind if I stopped by your homestead in the next few days? I would love to send my sister some details about Montana in my letter, and you seem to know the area well." Rose looked uncertain but also hopeful. "I suppose that would be all right. My father would probably enjoy the company. We do not get many visitors." Nathan nodded, hiding his satisfaction. "I appreciate that, madam." As she turned to leave, he held out the package of fabric. "Wait, you forgot this." Rose stared at him. "That is for your sister." "My sister who I have been lying about for the past 20 minutes, Nathan said quietly, making sure the storekeeper could not hear. "Please, I want you to have it." Color flooded her cheeks, and for a moment he thought she might cry. Then her face hardened. "I am not a charity case." "I never said you were," Nathan replied, keeping his voice gentle. "I am a cowboy with more money than sense, according to my trail boss, and I saw someone who reminded me of my mother when I was young. She would have taken the help if someone had offered, and she would have said thank you. There is no shame in accepting kindness, Miss Blackwood." They stood there in the dusty general store, 2 people from different circumstances connected by a moment of human compassion. Finally, Rose reached out and took the package, holding it against her chest like it was precious beyond measure. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you." Nathan watched her leave, carrying the fabric like it was spun gold, and when he turned back, the storekeeper was grinning at him. "That was well done, cowboy." "Just doing what is right," Nathan said. "Now I need some tobacco and ammunition." 3 days later, Nathan borrowed a horse from the livery stable and rode out to the Blackwood homestead. It was not hard to find, following Rose's directions, but his heart sank when he saw it. The cabin was small and listing slightly to one side, as if the foundation had settled unevenly. The barn looked even worse, with gaps in the walls wide enough to see through. A few scrawny chickens pecked at the hard-packed dirt of the yard, and a vegetable garden struggled valiantly against the rocky soil. Rose was hanging laundry when he arrived, and she looked surprised to see him. She was wearing the same patched dress, and Nathan realized with a start that she probably only had one. Mr. Xerxes, she said, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, I did not expect you to actually come. I said I would, Nathan replied, dismounting. Is your father home? I would like to meet him. Rose nodded and led him inside the cabin. The interior was cleaner than Nathan had expected, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture that had been carefully maintained. A man sat in a rocking chair by the fireplace, his right leg extended stiffly in front of him. He was probably in his 40s, but hardship had aged him, carving deep lines into his face. Pa, this is Nathan Xerxes. He is the cowboy I told you about, the one who. She trailed off, as if still not quite believing what had happened. Robert Blackwood studied Nathan with sharp gray eyes. The one who bought you fabric. Yes, sir, Nathan said, meeting his gaze steadily. I hope I did not overstep. A man looking out for someone in need is never overstepping, Robert said gruffly, though I wish I could provide for my daughter better myself. Pa, Rose said softly, a warning in her voice. It is the truth, Rose girl. No point pretending otherwise. Robert gestured to a chair. Sit down, young man. Tell me what brings a Texas cowboy to Montana. They talked for over an hour, and Nathan found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Robert Blackwood was an educated man who had come west with dreams of building something lasting. He had lost his wife to fever 6 years ago and had been slowly building up his homestead when a falling log crushed his hip and leg. Now he could barely walk, and the medical bills from the doctor in Bannack had taken everything they had saved. Rose served them coffee that was mostly chicory and some cornbread that was more corn than bread, but she did it with quiet dignity. Nathan noticed how she watched her father with concern, how she moved around the cabin with efficient grace despite obvious exhaustion. This was a woman who carried the weight of survival on her shoulders every single day. When Nathan finally took his leave, Rose walked him out to his horse. The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink, and in that light she looked almost ethereal. Thank you for visiting, she said. Pa has not talked that much in months. He used to love discussing books and politics, but these days he mostly just sits. He is a good man, Nathan observed. So are you a good woman working this hard to take care of him? Rose looked down at her worn boots. I just do what needs doing. Have you started on your dresses yet? Nathan asked, nodding toward the cabin. I have been working on the blue one in the evenings, Rose admitted, and her face transformed with a shy smile that hit Nathan like a physical force. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it was beautiful. I had forgotten what it feels like to sew new fabric instead of just patching old. The needle goes through so smoothly and the color is so bright. I know it is foolish to get so excited about a dress, but— It is not foolish, Nathan interrupted. Not at all. They stood there in the fading light, and Nathan realized with a start that he did not want to leave. He wanted to stay and talk to this woman with the patched dress and the beautiful smile. He wanted to learn everything about her, from her favorite color to her biggest dreams. The feeling was unfamiliar and thrilling. Can I come back? He asked. To visit, I mean. If that would be all right with you and your father. Rose's smile widened, and Nathan felt like he had just won every card game in Bannack simultaneously. I would like that, she said. We would both like that. Nathan rode back to town with his heart lighter than it had been in years, and he knew, with the certainty that sometimes came in moments of perfect clarity, that his life had just changed direction. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan found reasons to ride out to the Blackwood homestead nearly every other day. He brought supplies each time, claiming he had overpurchased or that the trail boss wanted to get rid of extra inventory before moving on. He brought flour and sugar, coffee and salt pork, nails and boards that he said were left over from some project in town. Robert Blackwood protested at first, but Nathan could see the relief in the older man's eyes, and Rose's gratitude was evident in every glance. Nathan also brought his labor. He repaired the barn wall, reinforced the cabin's foundation, and built a new chicken coop that would protect the birds from predators. He worked in the hot Montana sun with his shirt sleeves rolled up, and sometimes he would catch Rose watching him from the garden or the cabin doorway. When their eyes met, she would blush and look away, but not before he saw something warm in her gaze that made him work even harder. They talked while they worked. Rose would bring him water or help hold boards steady, and they would share stories. Nathan told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his father young and watching his mother struggle. He told her about his first cattle drive when he was just 15, and how scared he had been that he would fail. He told her about the vast prairies and the difficult river crossings, about stampedes and storms and the camaraderie of the cowboys. Rose told him about growing up as an only child, about her mother who had taught her to read and sew and see beauty in simple things. She told him about her dreams of maybe teaching school someday, or opening a dress shop. But those dreams had faded after her mother died and her father was injured. Now her only dream was to keep her father alive and to keep their homestead from falling completely apart. "You are going to leave soon," Rose said one evening as they sat on the cabin's front porch, watching the stars emerge. Her father was inside, already asleep, and the world felt very quiet and intimate. "When your trail boss finishes his business." Nathan had been dreading this conversation. "The crew is heading back to Texas next week," he admitted, "but I do not have to go with them." Rose turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have been a cowboy for 8 years, and I have saved most of what I have earned. I have enough to buy some land, start my own place. I have been thinking that Montana is as good a place as any to put down roots." He paused, gathering his courage. "Maybe even better than most, depending on the company." "Nathan," Rose said softly, and it was the first time she had used his first name without the Mr. before it. "You should not change your whole life because of." "Because of what?" Nathan turned to face her fully. "Because I met a woman who makes me want to be in one place for the first time in my adult life. Because I wake up excited to ride out here and see your smile. Because I think I am falling in love with you and I want to see where that might lead." The words hung in the night air between them. Rose's hand had come up to her mouth and he could not read her expression in the darkness. "You barely know me," she finally whispered. "I know enough," Nathan said firmly. "I know you are strong and kind. I know you would do anything for the people you love. I know you have not had an easy life, but you have not let it make you bitter. I know that when you smile, it feels like the sun coming out. And I know that I want to keep making you smile for as long as you will let me." Rose was quiet for a long moment, and Nathan's heart pounded so hard he thought she must be able to hear it. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and work-roughened in his. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone. I thought my life was just going to be work and worry forever. But then you came into that store and you looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth something more than just survival." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You are worth everything, Rose." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands and making soft plans. Nathan would talk to the land office about available parcels. He would stay in Bannack and find work while he got established. They would take things slow, do things properly. But they both knew, with the certainty that sometimes comes with genuine connection, that they had found something rare and precious. The next morning, Nathan rode into town with a specific purpose. He went to the land office first and spoke with the clerk about available homesteads. There was a parcel about 3 miles from the Blackwood place, 160 acres of grassland with a creek running through it. The price was fair, and Nathan put down a deposit without hesitation. Then he went to see the owner of the lumber mill and arranged to purchase enough timber to build a cabin. He would start small, just 2 rooms, but he would build it solid and true. He could expand later as needed. The mill owner said he could deliver the lumber in a week. Finally, Nathan went to the general store and bought more supplies. He bought better tools than the worn ones he had seen at the Blackwood homestead. He bought seeds for planting and fabric for curtains, and a new iron skillet because the one Rose was using had a crack in it. The storekeeper watched him with knowing eyes. "You are settling down," the man observed. "I am," Nathan agreed. "For the Blackwood girl, Rose," Nathan said, giving her the dignity of her name. "And yes, though I am doing it for myself too. A man cannot ride forever." The storekeeper nodded thoughtfully. "She is a good girl, had a rough time of it. You will treat her right." "I would die first before treating her any other way," Nathan said simply, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. When Nathan returned to the homestead that afternoon, he found Rose in the cabin, sewing by the window to catch the light. She was wearing the blue dress she had made from the fabric he bought, and the sight of her in new, unpatched fabric made his heart clench. The dress fit her perfectly, showing that she was more than just thin. She had a lovely figure that had been hidden by the shapeless, patched garment she had worn before. The blue brought out the color of her eyes and made her auburn hair seem to glow. "Rose," he said, and she looked up with that smile that made everything worthwhile. "You look beautiful." She blushed, standing and smoothing the skirt self-consciously. "It is the nicest thing I have owned in years. I keep touching it to make sure it is real." "You make it beautiful," Nathan said, crossing the room to her. "I have something to tell you." He explained about the land, about his plans to build a cabin and start a ranch. He talked about breeding horses, which he knew better than cattle, and maybe running some beef cattle on the side. He talked about the future with an enthusiasm he had not felt in years, and Rose listened with shining eyes. "I want to do this properly," Nathan said, taking both her hands in his. "I want to build something, prove I can provide. I want to court you the right way with your father's blessing. And then, if you will have me, I want to marry you and build a life together." "Yes," Rose said immediately. "Yes to all of it." Nathan laughed, spinning her around in the small cabin, and she laughed with him, the sound bright and free. When he set her down, their faces were close together and he could feel her breath on his lips. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Please," she whispered back. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Robert Blackwood gave his blessing that evening, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You will take care of her," he said to Nathan, and it was not quite a question. "With everything I have," Nathan promised. "Then you have my blessing and my gratitude," Robert said, gripping Nathan's hand firmly. "Though I will miss her terribly." "You will not be far," Nathan assured him. "And once my cabin is built, you will have to come for Sunday dinners." "Rose would never forgive me if I took her away from you completely." Over the following weeks, Nathan threw himself into building his new life with a determination that impressed even the most hardened workers in Bannack. He broke ground on his cabin site, digging the foundation posts himself and setting them with care. The lumber mill delivered the promised timber, and Nathan worked from sunrise to sunset, cutting and fitting and nailing. Other cowboys from his crew helped before they left for Texas, and some of the men from town came out too, curious about the Texas cowboy who was settling down for a woman. They worked in exchange for meals that Rose prepared, bringing the food out in baskets and serving it with quiet grace in her new blue dress. "Your woman is a good cook," one of the men commented to Nathan as they raised the frame for the cabin walls. "And pretty too. You are a lucky man." "I know it," Nathan said, glancing over to where Rose was pouring coffee for another group of workers. As if she felt his gaze, she looked up and smiled at him, and several of the men chuckled. "You have got it bad, Xerxes," another man said, but there was no mockery in his voice, only a kind of wistful envy. The cabin took shape over 3 weeks of intensive labor. It was not fancy, but it was solid, with good timber walls and a stone fireplace that Nathan built himself, remembering the techniques his father had taught him before he died. There were 2 rooms initially, with space to add more later. The windows had real glass, which was an extravagance, but Nathan wanted Rose to have light for her sewing. While Nathan built the cabin, Rose worked on preparing herself for married life. She finished the cream muslin dress and made 2 more from fabric Nathan insisted on buying, despite her protests. She sewed curtains for the cabin windows and embroidered pillowcases as a surprise. She preserved what vegetables she could from their struggling garden and learned new recipes from women in town. They saw each other nearly every day, and their love deepened with each encounter. Nathan learned that Rose sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs in a voice that was soft and pretty. Rose learned that Nathan had a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even on difficult days. They talked about everything and nothing, building the foundation of intimacy that would sustain a marriage. One evening, Nathan arrived at the Blackwood homestead with a small box. Rose was sitting on the porch, mending one of her father's shirts, and she looked up with pleased surprise when she saw him. "I thought you were working on the cabin today," she said. "I was, but I finished the fireplace and wanted to celebrate," Nathan said, sitting beside her. "I have something for you." He handed her the box, and Rose opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was simple but beautiful, with an engraved rose on the front. "Nathan," she breathed, "it is too much." "Nothing is too much for you," he said firmly. "Open it." Inside the locket was a tiny photograph, one of the new tin types that were becoming popular. It showed Nathan in his best shirt, looking serious and handsome. Rose traced the image with one finger, her eyes soft. "When did you have this made?" "Last week in town." "I wanted you to have something of me, even when I am not with you." He reached out and fastened the locket around her neck. "Though I plan to be with you as much as possible for the rest of our lives." Rose touched the locket where it rested against her collarbone, then leaned over and kissed Nathan softly. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I have said that clearly enough. I love you, Nathan Xerxes, and I cannot wait to be your wife." "I love you too," Nathan said against her lips. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." They were married on a bright September morning in 1875, in the small church in Bannack with half the town in attendance. Rose wore a new dress she had made especially for the occasion, white muslin with blue ribbon trim, and she carried wildflowers that Nathan had picked that morning. She looked radiant, and when Nathan saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Nathan promised to love and cherish Rose for all his days, and she promised the same to him. When the preacher said he could kiss his bride, Nathan did so with all the love in his heart, and the congregation applauded. The reception was held at the new cabin, which was finally complete. The single large room that served as kitchen and living area was packed with well-wishers who brought food and gifts. There was music and dancing, and Nathan waltzed Rose around their new home while everyone clapped and cheered. Robert Blackwood sat in the place of honor by the fireplace, his injured legs stretched out, watching his daughter with pride and a touch of melancholy. Nathan made sure to bring Rose over to him several times throughout the day. "You are not losing me, Pa," Rose said, kneeling beside her father's chair. "Nathan promised you will come for Sunday dinners and I will visit during the week. You will be sick of seeing me soon enough." "Never," Robert said gruffly, touching her cheek. "But I am happy for you, Rose girl. Happier than I can say. Your mother would have loved him." "I think so too," Rose said softly. When the guests finally left and the sun was setting, Nathan and Rose stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. Then Nathan swept Rose up in his arms, making her laugh, and carried her over the threshold of their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xerxes," he said, setting her down gently. "It feels like a dream," Rose said, looking around the cabin. The furniture was simple but new, made by Nathan's own hands. The curtains she had sewn hung at the windows. The fireplace was cold now but would keep them warm through the coming winter. "A wonderful dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Nathan said, pulling her close. They made love for the first time that night with tenderness and care, learning each other in the intimate darkness of their marriage bed. Rose had been nervous, but Nathan was patient and gentle, and when she cried afterward, it was from happiness and the overwhelming feeling of being truly cherished for the first time in her life. The early days of their marriage were filled with hard work and simple joys. Nathan spent his days working on the ranch, building corrals and a proper barn, buying his first horses and beginning the slow process of building a herd. Rose kept the cabin spotless, cooked meals that actually had enough food in them, and continued her sewing. She discovered that she had a talent for it beyond simple repairs, and women in town began asking her to make dresses for them. The extra money was helpful as they established themselves. They visited Rose Blackwood every Sunday, bringing food and supplies. Nathan had arranged for a boy from town to check on Robert during the week, doing chores and making sure he had everything he needed. The older man's health seemed to improve with the reduction in stress, and he enjoyed the weekly visits immensely. Winter came early to Montana that year, with snow beginning to fall in late October. Nathan had prepared well, stockpiling firewood and supplies, and the cabin proved warm and snug against the cold. On long winter evenings, Rose would sew by lamplight while Nathan read aloud from books they borrowed from the preacher's small library. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing dreams and memories, building the deep companionship that was the bedrock of their love. It was during one of those winter evenings that Rose first suspected she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be sure, then told Nathan one night as they lay in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. "I think I am going to have a baby," she said softly, her hand on her still flat stomach. Nathan sat up so quickly he nearly knocked over the lamp on the bedside table. "What? Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Rose said, smiling at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "I am thrilled, terrified but thrilled." "When?" "Late summer, I think, July or August." They went to see the doctor in Bannack the next week, and he confirmed Rose's suspicions. She was indeed pregnant, healthy and strong, and there was no reason to expect any complications. Nathan spent the rest of the day walking around with a dazed, delighted expression, and Rose teased him about it gently. "You are going to be insufferable for the next 7 months, are you not?" she asked as they rode home in the wagon Nathan had recently purchased. "Probably," Nathan admitted, taking her hand. "I just cannot believe it. We are going to be parents, Rose." "I know," she said, and her voice held wonder and a little fear. "I hope I am good at it." "You will be amazing," Nathan said with certainty. Look at how you took care of your father all those years. You know how to love and nurture. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you as a mother." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the long Montana winter and into spring. Nathan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about Rose doing too much. She found it endearing even when it was frustrating, and she learned to pick her battles. She would let him carry heavy things and refuse to let her chop wood, but she insisted on continuing her sewing and cooking. Robert Blackwood was delighted at the news that he would be a grandfather. His health had continued to improve with reduced stress and better nutrition, and he was able to get around a bit more with a cane Nathan had carved for him. He began making a cradle for the baby, working slowly and carefully in his workshop, and presented it to Rose and Nathan in May. It was beautiful, made of smooth pine with carved roses on the headboard. "Pa, it is perfect," Rose said, running her fingers over the carving with tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "A baby should have something made with love," Robert said gruffly. "This child will be loved, I know that much." In June, Nathan added a second room to the cabin specifically for the baby. It was small but cozy, with a window that looked out over the grassland where his horses grazed. Rose sewed curtains with little yellow flowers and made tiny gowns and blankets from soft fabric. Everything was prepared and waiting. Their son was born on a sweltering afternoon in late July, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left both Rose and Nathan exhausted. The doctor had come from town, and he pronounced the baby healthy and strong. Nathan held his son for the first time with shaking hands, looking down at the tiny red face with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "Rose, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Rose asked from the bed, exhausted but glowing with happiness. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, holding his son, Nathan thought of his own father, who had died too young but had been a good man who worked hard and loved his family. "What about James?" he suggested. "After my father." "James Xerxes," Rose said, trying it out. "I like it. James Robert Xerxes after both our fathers." "Perfect," Nathan agreed. Robert Blackwood came to visit the next day and held his grandson with tears streaming down his weathered face. "He has your eyes, Rose," he said, "and he is strong. I can tell already." The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tiny milestones. Nathan and Rose navigated parenthood together, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating every small victory. Nathan would walk the floor with James when he cried at night, and Rose would watch them with a full heart. Rose would nurse the baby and sing to him, and Nathan would sit nearby, marveling at the sight of his wife and child together. The ranch continued to grow. Nathan's horse breeding was successful, and he was beginning to develop a reputation for quality animals. They had enough income now to live comfortably, though not extravagantly. Rose continued her sewing business, working during James's nap times, and her reputation grew as well. Life was full and busy and happy. When James was 2 years old, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more sickness and fatigue, but Rose pushed through with her characteristic determination. Their daughter was born in April 1878, smaller than James had been, but just as healthy. They named her Clara, after Nathan's mother. With 2 children, the cabin became truly cramped, so Nathan added 2 more rooms that summer, creating a proper bedroom for him and Rose, and a larger room for the children to share. The house was beginning to look like a real family home, and Nathan felt a deep satisfaction every time he looked at it. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Nathan and Rose's love deepened with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, childhood illnesses and sleepless nights. But they faced everything together, and their partnership was unshakable. Robert Blackwood remained a constant presence in their lives, coming for Sunday dinners and holidays. He watched his grandchildren grow with pride and joy, and he was able to walk well enough with his cane to take short strolls around the ranch with James and Clara, telling them stories about their grandmother and about the early days in Montana. One evening, when James was 5 and Clara was 3, the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. The children were playing in the yard, and Rose sat in a rocking chair with her sewing, now completely unnecessary for survival and done purely for pleasure and profit. Nathan sat beside her, watching his children with contentment. "You ever miss it?" Rose asked suddenly. "The cowboy life, the trail drives, the freedom?" Nathan considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "No, I thought I might, especially at first, but I do not. That life was about running towards something I could not name. This life is about being exactly where I am supposed to be." Rose reached over and took his hand, and Nathan lifted it to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had that first night on her father's porch. The locket he had given her all those years ago still hung around her neck, worn smooth from constant wear. "I love you," Rose said softly. "I do not think I say it enough. Thank you for buying me that fabric. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." "I love you too," Nathan replied. "And I will always see you, Rose. Always." The years continued to pass in a steady, pleasant stream. James grew into a sturdy boy who loved horses like his father and had his mother's kind heart. Clara was more spirited, with a quick laugh and a stubborn streak that kept her parents on their toes. They added a third child in 1881, another boy they named Robert after Rose's father, and their final child, a daughter named Mary, came in 1884. The ranch grew to become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the region. Nathan hired hands to help with the work, and he became known as a fair employer who treated his workers well. Rose's sewing business evolved into a small dress shop in Bannack, run with the help of 2 young women she trained. The money was good, but more importantly, Rose had created something of her own, fulfilling that old dream she had once thought lost forever. Robert Blackwood lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren, and he passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1886, at the age of 63. He died in his own cabin, which Nathan and Rose had maintained for him, and his last words to Rose were that he was proud of her, and that he was going to see her mother now. The loss was hard, but Rose took comfort in knowing her father had died happy, surrounded by love, and free from the desperate poverty that had defined his final years before Nathan came into their lives. They buried him in the Bannack cemetery next to Rose's mother, and the whole town came to the funeral to pay their respects. Life continued, as it always does. The children grew and developed their own personalities and dreams. James wanted to be a rancher like his father. Clara talked about becoming a teacher. Young Robert was fascinated by mechanics and machines. Mary, the baby, was too young yet to know what she wanted, but she showed signs of her mother's creativity and her father's determination. On a warm spring evening in 1890, 15 years after Nathan had first walked into that general store in Bannack, he and Rose sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones with homework and chores. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-maintained, with horses grazing peacefully in the distance. "You remember the day we met?" Nathan asked, his arm around Rose's shoulders. "Every detail," Rose said, leaning into him. I was standing in that store doorway, afraid to even breathe, and you came in covered in trail dust. I thought you were just another cowboy passing through." "I saw your dress," Nathan said quietly. "All those patches and the way you looked at that fabric like it was the stars themselves." "I counted them, the patches." Rose looked up at him in surprise. "You did? At least 30 on the parts I could see. And I thought about my mother and about how hard life can be and about how sometimes one moment of kindness can change everything." He pulled her closer. "I am so glad I listened to that impulse. So glad I had the courage to talk to you." "I am glad too," Rose said. "Though I have to admit I did not believe you about the sister at first. I thought it was a strange excuse." Nathan laughed. "It was a terrible lie. I am amazed you went along with it." "I wanted to believe," Rose admitted. "I wanted to believe that someone could look at me and see something worth caring about. And then you just kept coming back, kept building things and fixing things and making me feel like I mattered." "You have always mattered," Nathan said firmly. "From that very first moment." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade from the sky. Inside, they could hear Clara playing the piano Nathan had bought last year, her fingers stumbling occasionally but improving steadily. James was telling Robert a story, his voice rising and falling dramatically. Mary laughed at something, the sound bright and pure. "We have a good life," Rose said contentedly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that this is my life now." "It is real," Nathan assured her. "This is our life, the one we built together from fabric and kindness and love." Rose touched the locket at her throat, a habitual gesture after all these years. Nathan's picture was still inside, though it was faded now, joined by tiny photos of their children that they had added over the years. The locket had become a tangible symbol of their journey from that desperate moment in the general store to this moment of peace and prosperity. "I want to grow old with you," Rose said softly. "I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want to sit on this porch in 30 years and remember everything we have been through together." "Then that is what we will do," Nathan promised. "Every day, every year, for as long as we both shall live." He kissed her then, the same tender kiss that had sealed their first night together, and Rose kissed him back with all the love of 15 years of marriage. They were no longer the desperate girl in the patched dress and the compassionate cowboy. They were partners, lovers, parents, friends. They were everything to each other. As the stars began to emerge in the Montana sky, Nathan thought about all the paths he could have taken in his life. He could have ridden back to Texas with the crew. He could have moved on to another town, another job, another adventure. But instead, he had chosen to see the woman in the patched dress, to offer her fabric and watch her smile, and that single choice had led him to this moment of perfect contentment. Inside the house, Clara's piano playing had stopped, and all 4 children came tumbling out onto the porch, excited about something. James was carrying a jar with lightning bugs in it, their tiny lights blinking in the gathering darkness. Clara was already planning where they should release them for maximum effect. Robert was explaining the science of bioluminescence in his earnest way. Mary was just excited to be included in whatever her older siblings were doing. Nathan and Rose watched their children with full hearts, their hands intertwined, their love as strong as the mountains that surrounded their Montana home. The patched dress was long gone, packed away in a trunk as a reminder of where they had come from. In its place were beautiful gowns that Rose had made herself, dresses of silk and lace and fine cotton. But sometimes, late at night, Rose would take out that old patched dress and remember. She would remember the desperation, yes, but also the moment when hope had walked into the general store in the form of a dusty cowboy with kind eyes. She would remember learning that she deserved beautiful things, that she deserved love and happiness. She would remember that first smile, the one Nathan had given her when she held the blue fabric for the first time, and she would understand that he had been falling in love with her even then, just as she had been falling in love with him. The years continued to flow by like the creek that ran through their property, steady and sure. James married at 22 to a girl from town and took over more of the ranch operations, eventually building his own house on the far edge of the property. Clara became a teacher as she had dreamed, educating children in Bannack's growing school. Robert moved to Helena to work with an engineering firm, his brilliant mind finding outlets in the growing industrialization of the West. Mary, the youngest, showed a talent for art and eventually opened a small gallery in town, painting the Montana landscapes she loved. Nathan and Rose became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched their family tree spread and grow, and they took pride in knowing that every single person in it existed because Nathan had chosen kindness over indifference, because he had seen a woman in need and offered help without expecting anything in return. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1905, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. The original cabin had been expanded so many times it was now a substantial house, but the core of it, that first room Nathan had built, was still there, still solid. They had added modern conveniences over the years like a proper kitchen and indoor plumbing, but the stone fireplace Nathan had built with his own hands remained the heart of the home. Rose, now 50 years old but still beautiful in Nathan's eyes, stood in that original room and looked around at all the people who had come from the choice they had made to love each other. Her hair was more silver than auburn now, and lines creased her face, but her smile was the same smile that had captured Nathan's heart in that general store 3 decades ago. Nathan, at 53, had gray in his dark hair, and his body bore the marks of a lifetime of hard physical labor, but he still stood straight and strong. He still looked at his wife with the same love and wonder he had felt when she was 19 and desperate and beautiful in a dress patched 100 times. James stood to make a toast, his own children clustered around him. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day, who showed us that kindness can change lives, who built something lasting not just in buildings and businesses, but in family and community." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast, and Rose felt tears slip down her cheeks. Nathan pulled her close, and she leaned into him the way she had done 10,000 times before. "Happy anniversary, my love," Nathan murmured into her hair. "Happy anniversary," Rose replied. "Thank you for buying me fabric all those years ago. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting me love you," Nathan said. "For building this life with me. I would not change a single moment." They celebrated late into the evening, and when the guests finally departed and the house was quiet, Nathan and Rose walked out to the porch one more time. It was their ritual, this watching of the sunset and stars, this moment of quiet communion at the end of each day. "You think about it much?" Nathan asked. "That first day, all the time," Rose admitted. "How could I not? It was the day my life changed, the day I went from just surviving to actually living." "It changed my life too," Nathan said. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me purpose and direction and joy. You gave me everything that matters." They stood together in the Montana darkness, two people who had chosen each other across the divide of circumstance and had spent 3 decades proving that the choice had been right. Behind them, The house was full of the evidence of their love. Photographs on the walls, furniture they had built or purchased together, the piano where Clara had learned to play, the books they had read aloud to each other and their children. The ranch spread out before them, successful and sustainable, ready to pass to the next generation. The horses in the distant fields were descendants of the first horses Nathan had bought when they were newlyweds. The garden Rose had planted and tended for 30 years still produced vegetables every summer. Everything was connected. Everything mattered. Everything was part of the story that had begun with patches and fabric and a cowboy's compassion. Nathan and Rose grew old together, just as they had promised on their porch that evening 15 years after their wedding. They saw the turn of the century, witnessed the end of the Wild West era and the beginning of the modern age. They saw automobiles replace horses in town, though Nathan refused to give up his horses on the ranch. They saw electric lights come to Bannack, and telephones, and a dozen other innovations that would have seemed like magic when they first met. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other. When Rose fell ill with pneumonia in the winter of 1912, Nathan never left her side, sleeping in a chair by her bed and nursing her back to health with the same dedication she had shown her father all those years ago. When Nathan injured his back falling from a horse in 1915, Rose cared for him with patience and love, never complaining about the extra work. They were both in their 60s now, slowing down but still active. James ran the ranch almost entirely, though Nathan still consulted on major decisions. Rose had given up her dress shop but still sewed for pleasure, making quilts for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They spent their days puttering around the house and property, receiving visitors, and enjoying the peace they had earned through decades of hard work. On a spring morning in 1920, 45 years after they first met, Rose found Nathan in the barn brushing down one of the old mares. She came up beside him, and he put his arm around her automatically, a gesture so familiar it required no thought. "I had a dream last night," Rose said. "About that first day. I was standing in the store doorway in my patched dress, and you came in, just like you did in real life. But in the dream, I could see the future spreading out from that moment like ripples on a pond. I could see everything we would build, everyone who would come from our choice to love each other." "Was it a good dream?" Nathan asked, though he knew the answer. "The best," Rose said, smiling up at him. "The very best." They walked back to the house together, moving slowly now but still hand in hand. The mountains rose majestic in the distance, unchanged by the decades that had transformed everything else. The sky was the same blue as the fabric Nathan had bought all those years ago, as the dress Rose had made and worn until it was too worn to repair, kept now as a precious memento of where they had started. Nathan and Rose lived into their 70s, rare for their generation, and they credited their longevity to love and purpose. They were surrounded by family, respected in their community, and content with the lives they had lived. When Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925 at the age of 73, Rose mourned deeply, but without regret. They had had 50 wonderful years together, and she had loved every moment. She lived 2 more years after his death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about Nathan and their early days together. She told them about the patched dress, about the fabric, about the smile she had given when she first touched the new material. She told them about falling in love with a cowboy who saw her when she felt invisible, who chose kindness and changed her entire world. Rose died in the spring of 1927 at the age of 71, in the house Nathan had built for her, surrounded by the family they had created together. Her last words were soft and content. "I am going to see Nathan now. Tell him I am coming." They buried her next to Nathan in the Bannack cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Rose Blackwood Xerxes, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She was seen and she was loved." Next to it, Nathan's stone read, "Nathan Xerxes, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He saw and he loved." The ranch continued through the generations, passed down from James to his children and then to theirs. The original cabin, that first room Nathan had built, was preserved as a family museum of sorts, filled with artifacts from Nathan and Rose's life together. The patched dress hung in a place of honor, carefully preserved, a reminder of where it all began. On the wall next to the dress was the blue fabric from that first purchase, what little remained of it after Rose had made her dress. There was the locket Nathan had given Rose, now a family heirloom passed to the eldest daughter of each generation. There were photographs and letters, tools Nathan had used, sewing implements Rose had treasured, books they had read together. But more than the physical objects, Nathan and Rose left a legacy of love and kindness that rippled through their descendants. They taught their children and grandchildren that one moment of compassion could change everything, that seeing someone's dignity and worth could transform lives. They showed that love was not just about grand gestures, but about showing up every day, about choosing each other again and again. The story of the cowboy who bought fabric for a girl in a patched dress became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It became the standard against which all romances in the family were measured. Did you choose kindness? Did you see the person beneath the circumstances? Did you offer help expecting nothing in return? Decades after their deaths, historians researching the settlement of Montana came across the Xerxes family records. They found letters Rose had written to friends describing her first meeting with Nathan. They found Nathan's journal entries from those early months, describing his growing love for the woman in the patched dress. They found business records showing the growth of the ranch, and community records showing the impact Nathan and Rose had on Bannack. The historians pieced together the story and published it as an example of the human side of the Wild West, a reminder that behind all the legends of gunfighters and gold rushes were ordinary people making choices about how to treat each other, about whether to offer kindness or look away. The story resonated far beyond Montana, touching hearts across the country. It reminded people that small acts of kindness could have enormous consequences, that seeing another person's humanity was revolutionary, that love built on compassion and respect could withstand anything. In the end, Nathan and Rose's story was simple but profound. A cowboy saw a girl in a patched dress and chose to help. A girl accepted that help and let herself hope. They fell in love and built a life together. And from that life came children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each one carrying forward the legacy of kindness and love. The dress that had been patched 100 times was eventually displayed in a local museum, along with the blue fabric and the story behind it. Visitors would stand in front of the display and read about Nathan and Rose, and many would leave with tears in their eyes, moved by the simple beauty of two people who chose each other across the divide of circumstance and built something lasting. The story reminded people that everyone has worth, that everyone deserves to be seen and valued. It reminded them that kindness matters, that small gestures can have enormous impacts, that love is the most powerful force in the world when it is given freely and received with gratitude. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Nathan and Rose were together again, still hand in hand, still watching sunsets, still choosing each other every single day. The patched dress was forgotten because it no longer mattered. What mattered was the love it had sparked, the life it had led to, the family it had created. What mattered was that a cowboy had seen a girl, had bought her fabric, and had watched her smile. And from that smile had come everything: love and marriage, children and grandchildren, prosperity and peace, a legacy that would endure for generations. It was a simple story of kindness and love, set in the wild west of Montana in 1875. And it proved that even in the hardest times and the roughest places, human compassion could create miracles. Nathan had given Rose fabric when she needed it most, but Rose had given Nathan something just as precious: a reason to stay, a purpose for his wandering, a home in her heart. Together, they had built something beautiful from nearly nothing, and their descendants would carry that beauty forward into the future. A ripple of love extending out from that single moment when a cowboy saw a girl in a patched dress and chose to care. That was their legacy, and it was more than enough.